course.
Not many.
Dear guests, excellencies, for those of you I met this morning, welcome back. For everyone else, hello. I'm Mariana Evanstein, and I'm delighted to be moderating this next conversation on unlocking philanthropy's role in cultural resilience. So, philanthropy has always played a role in the arts, we know that. The problem, however, is that in many cases, this support is reactive. In other words, it's in response to some sort of crisis or disaster or some very dramatic need. And even though this type of generosity is very vital, it's welcome, it's always great when we can see examples of this, we want to explore in this conversation with my very esteemed panel how private giving can move beyond just being a one-off thing or an act of charity, and instead become a strategic and also long-term investment that strengthens cultural resilience and does so around the world. So you can see I have quite a large panel with me, and I'm very excited because these individuals bring such a broad wealth of experience and different perspectives, and I'm delighted to introduce you to all of them. Sitting over here is Dr. Colin Bailey. He's the director of the Morgan Library. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also, very thrilled to have Sir Vernon Ellis. He's chair of Live Music Now and trustee of Figurative. Hello. Beside him is Mounika Heyslington. She's head of art and collectible strategy at Goldman Sachs Family Office. Welcome. Also, Kamel Manour. He's founder of Manour Gallery. And welcome to you. And last but not least, very far away, hello, is Scott Stover. He's the founder of Scott Stover, Inc., which is a consultancy. Well, where do we even begin? I wish our audience could have had the chance to listen into the conversation we were having backstage before this panel, because it really, to me, was a great way to get into this conversation and just to think about philanthropy as really an act of not just charity, as we keep wanting to emphasize, but it's an act of generosity and giving that aims to preserve the beauty of culture and the power of culture and the impact of culture. So, Colin, maybe we can start with you and just share with us, from your perspective from the Morgan Library, what is the impact of philanthropy when it comes to, at least at the Morgan Library, and how is it possible to measure that impact?
Thank you. Very quickly, the Morgan Library and Museum is 100 years old. It is a private institution. It started as the personal library of the great financier John Pierpont Morgan, who died in 1913, and then it was led by a board of trustees governed by his son, but it was actually, the motivation was the first librarian, a woman of color, a black woman whose name was Belle da Costa Green, who had to pass as white in the structure of American society in the 20s and 30s. This library is now called a library and museum. Morgan left his collections, he left money, and he left a board of trustees. Many of the things that the Morgan collects today, the founder would have had no interest in whatsoever. On the other hand, many of the things that we conserve and collect lovingly are things that were very close to his heart. He was interested in medieval printed books, old master drawings. He was not interested, and in literature and autographs, but he was not interested particularly in the modern. Why I mention this is that over successive generations, this beloved institution, which is a research library and a museum, 99% of its collections are on paper, and so they cannot be on the walls all the time. But over decades, we have seen this collection grow as new collectors and new trustees and new philanthropists have thought that we would be a good home to preserve their collections. Philanthropy is not only giving money, it's also giving art and works and giving advice. All three are fundamental. The Morgan, like many private institutions in America, less so in Europe and less so elsewhere, is really supported by an endowment. This is money that has grown and is invested and can be spent at a 4% or 5% drawdown on specific, either restricted or unrestricted things. The building, the staffing, the maintenance of and the electricity have to come out of that endowment. The endowment is then balanced, amplified by fundraising, operations that produce profit, shop, exhibitions, relations, connections, if you like, that can motivate support. But at the heart of this institution is a sense that the collections and the money to support certain collections are both well stewarded. The collections are looked after, catalogued, conserved, amplified, and the endowment is managed scrupulously over generations. And so the picture is relatively rosy for us, but I would stress the value of endowments that grow over time, that are restricted or unrestricted, and that you never invade the principle and you only use the money that is brought out, that is offered by the interest on this fund. I think that's probably what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so critical to an institution that's protecting heritage like the Morgan Library, but of course philanthropy can also make an impact for contemporary artists, and Camille, you're a gallerist, and you see firsthand what living artists need. So can you tell us how philanthropy can support them? So not just heritage, but also contemporary artists and living creative communities.
Just to summarize a little bit the gallery, I opened the gallery 25 years before. I did a Master of Economics. I was not in the field of art, but I fell in love with art, and I was very obsessed with opening the gallery. So I was reading a lot of books, and I was meeting a lot of contemporary artists. And during the beginning of the gallery, I met some of the very important dealers in Europe, Anthony Dauphin, who gave a part of his collection to the Tate Modern in London. And I was very inspired by that, thinking that you can do a lot of money with art, you know, paying artists and paying all your staff and everything, you know, but also you can support the legacy of what you did. So 10 years before, inspired by Anthony Dauphin that I met in Glasgow some years before, I started to found which is something non-commercial at the gallery. So we have a part which is totally commercial, doing all the Art Basel. I met Noah Horowitz this morning, or buying works at Christie's and Sotheby's, but also in a part of the gallery, a chapter in which we are doing some non-profit, non-commercials. It's called Münner Institute, with different grants, and which brings me to another territory of landscape. So philanthropy is not charity, it's an investment, because you give the hand to a new generation, which is very important. Education. Education is an investment. You know, I started from a field in which, in my family, there was no art. My mother was a cleaning woman, so when I did my studies, I was learning in books, and I had no a mentor who could advise me what to do, not to do. You know, I met very often some dear friends in fairs, but in the beginning I knew no one, so it was very difficult. For me, philanthropy is something extremely important, which bring the DNA and also the vision of the gallery to another territory. So we have, I was saying, the Münner Institute. We have a fellowship for research in art in history, in which we are giving money to students to apply and to study different fields of art history which are not very known and identified. We have also another grant which is called Menu Émergence, that we are bringing to the territory of art some new scholars who comes from schools of art and helping them to understand what is the discussion with the curator, with the press people, with the galleries, explaining the deals which will be their careers at the end, you know. And at the end, since 10 years, I'm very connected with genetic research in Hôpital Necker in Paris, which is a dialogue between art and science. And we did 5 fundraising with dinners, you know, asking artists and some of my collection to raise money for this hospital. And this is a bridge between science and art. And last but not least, I decided, because in Paris, as you might know, there's 2 big tycoons. There's François Pinault and Bernard Arnault, and I couldn't struggle with those guys who are a little bit stronger than I. And I decided to give a big part of my collection that I was doing since 25 years, 180 works, to the Musée d'Art Moderne of la Ville de Paris, to bring this idea of explaining a little bit what German are calling Zeitgeist, the kind of artists that I was following and promoting, to try to let a small legacy and a small memory. So this is a little bit what we are doing, and it's give me a lot of spirit and a good vision with the gift that art gave to me in my life.
So it's clear what an important impact philanthropy makes on heritage and also living artists. And it's, as we keep hearing, it's not just about charity, but also that the returns may not necessarily always be measured in currency necessarily, but the returns are on so many other levels. And yet, the problem that we see too often is that these acts of philanthropy are just temporary, or they're just reactive to something, in reaction to something. So I really would love to hear, perhaps from you, Vernon, what makes philanthropy stick? How can we foster a culture of sustained and long-term giving and not just episodic giving?
That's a very good question, Mariana. And it's a complex one, though, because I think cultural giving, as opposed to cultural investment, is an interesting class of philanthropy. I mean, generally, we have a problem of, certainly at a higher level, being very spotty. Certainly in Britain and Western Europe, there are some very generous people, and there are a lot of people who could contribute more to society who don't. And in arts, most cultural institutions have a bilateral relationship with their major funders. They like to be looked after well, meet the artists, whatever, and they think it's a good thing, therefore they give them money, generally annually, but perhaps over a certain amount of time. And that's wonderful, it needs to be preserved. It's not enough. It's not enough because there are 2 major challenges. One is that there's increasing pressure on finances. It's always difficult, particularly for smaller arts organizations, but there's a reduction in government support. I mean, everywhere in traditional arts, it's what we call subsidized arts, because people are not prepared to pay a ticket price or an admission fee that covers the cost. It's just a fact. And through history, that's been the case. So we've had to have subsidy from government or private individuals or corporations. Government subsidy is going down. Local government in Britain has almost disappeared, which has left a lot of local, outside London organizations very naked. And therefore, we have to try and I've been involved in a number of schemes to try and widen exactly on the impact side, that the arts are good for this community, whether it's a city or a county. They can make a difference. They can have a difference in education, in well-being, health, and indeed the community, and feel pride in that community, reconnecting the heritage of that community, etc. So we've been instituting some schemes, about 20 around the country, boosted by matched giving, which can be a good accelerator and is not used enough. I think matched giving is a very good device. So that's one thing, to widen and focus on impact. There's still a problem, though. The second one, quickly, is that this annual focus on trying to match the gap between costs and income leads to what I would call a subsidy mindset. It's natural, it's understandable, but it is very difficult to combine that with an investment mindset. And therefore we need, and getting an investment mindset is difficult when how do you invest in something that is basically not making money? Well, you have to be clever. In the previous session I heard mention impact bonds, and we try to devise new kind of vehicles. One very simple example with Figurative, an organization I'm with, is what they call conditional philanthropy for Royal Shakespeare Company. Royal Shakespeare Company does very good programs of literacy and oracy with schools, about 250 schools. They wanted to go up to 300 schools. They wanted to get the money quickly to start that. They got a bunch of philanthropists to say, we will commit to this money, but we won't give you the money until you proved you made that difference and can measure the results in those schools you're working with. Meanwhile, Figurative are giving that money, which is then at the Royal Shakespeare Company's risk if they don't get that money. We need to be more innovative with those kinds of models.
I'd be curious to hear from Mounika now, because in your work, you're actually advising families on how philanthropy and legacy planning fit together. What kinds of trends are you seeing among the maybe younger philanthropists and how they look at giving in the culture sector? Are people really looking for a return on investment? Are they willing just to give with hoping that they'll make an impact in many different ways? What kinds of discussions have you been having?
Well, I would say that one of the major trends that I'm seeing is how philanthropists, especially younger ones, are being much more mindful about actually causing an impact. And one area that I think is most pertinent to this conference is how many philanthropists are taking all of the new scientific data that we have about how art is actually one of the most powerful tools that we have to unlock the potential of the human mind and to uplift and to transform not only individuals, but families, communities, and also countries and the world. Because what this data is showing is that people who are involved in the arts on a daily basis, whether you are a creator or whether you are someone who is consuming the arts, you have better emotional and mental capabilities, you have more resilience, less stressed, less anxiety, you're better able to handle depression and life. You also have the ability to have more cognitive function, more mental capacity. They've done many studies with children that indicate that children who have art exposure, they learn better, even in STEM materials. They retain what they have learned. They also are more creative and curious, and those are the two keys of innovation, which we all know leads to economic growth. And we can't forget all of the interpersonal and social skills as well that are one of the benefits of being involved in the arts. They've done studies with teenagers who show that teenagers who are involved in the arts are better communicators, they show more teamwork, they're more collaborative, they are also more empathetic to other people. So how is that impacting many of the philanthropists that I'm working with? Is that they're being much more mindful about how can we tap into these superpowers, special superpowers that the arts have in order to really improve society. And so since I deal mostly with art collectors, I'll just give an example of what I've seen over the years. So 25 years ago, if someone was a collector and they wanted to do philanthropy with their art collections, kind of the default was, I'll give my art to a museum. And the main question, because I like art, I get pleasure from it, I hope other people will. And the questions that they were asking were, am I going to get a plaque, my name on the wall, yes or no? Or am I going to, how long is my work is going to be up permanently, 6 months of the year? Those were the main focus. And now the questions are completely different. I'm seeing people asking these museum directors, well, if I give you my collection, who's going to see this? Is it going to be the top 20, 30% of the socioeconomic ladder who already are exposed to art all the time? What are you going to do to use my collection to reach the bottom 20 to 30% of society who have never been to a museum and they don't think they need to go to a museum? And you can have the most amazing exhibition with some golden lion winning, from the Venice Biennale artist, and these people aren't going to care because they don't know what the Venice Biennale is. So who's your community engagement person? I'm also seeing philanthropists that are bypassing sort of the traditional museum model entirely. So many people are starting now to donate their collections to hospitals. They're starting to give money to, let's say, children's cancer hospitals. That is one we're seeing quite often in the US. And so they're using those funds to commission artists to do murals. They're having artists come in and work with the children and their families and siblings to do art projects. And that is because one of the superpowers of art is that it helps in healing. People heal quicker, they can better deal with all of the stress of a bad diagnosis. It also helps with pain management. I'm even seeing collectors that are just selling their collections entirely, either over time during their lifetimes or on their passing, and those funds are being used, again, very specifically tapping into those superpowers of art. So I'm seeing art therapy for people who are suffering from specific kinds of trauma. We're also seeing art centers that are being brought into communities that either museums are not reaching or in areas where there are not robust art programs in the schools, either because they have never been there or because, unfortunately, many governments, that's one of the first things to cut back is culture. So people are stepping in to fill in that gap. And then one of the most promising things that I'm seeing is many of these philanthropists are starting to reach out to other foundations that, for example, are focusing on education. And they're saying, look, we know you are focused on education, but are you aware, here's all of this data that shows that if you can incorporate sort of the arts into what you are doing, the people that you are trying to educate are going to retain what they're learning, they're going to learn quicker, and it's going to be much more impactful. And they're also doing the same with organizations that focus on health and saying, look, here's all that art can do. It is a great superpower when it comes to healing. So why don't we try and find some projects together where you can incorporate the arts into your mission of health? So I think those are some very positive trends that I'm seeing, and people are really able to make impact right now to people who are really suffering and need help. So,
Monique, I find that super fascinating. I was not aware of that these were actual studies that were done to measure the impact of arts on all the things that you mentioned,
yes,
but it's not surprising. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, Your Brain on Art. That's a book everyone should read. Your Brain on Art. If you haven't read it yet.
But again, I think we need to remember, because culture taps into the essence of what it means to be human. And this is also so powerful when we can connect people to those parts of themselves, that creative expression. And this is why it is really heartening to hear that people that you've been working with are thinking in these terms. And again, not just as in terms of return on investment in currency, but in return on investment for all these areas of impact. And Scott, you also are very much advising people on how they can combine sustainability, philanthropy, and impact. And I know that you've been championing the idea of philanthropreneur. I think that's a very funny word. Maybe you can explain to us what is a philanthropreneur and what does it take to make cultural philanthropy more entrepreneurial?
Well, actually, it's quite simple. It's basically, mostly I work with people who've already made a decision that they want to create some kind of cultural project or foundation. So it's applying a kind of investment banking principle to the particular project, which is looking at the project in terms of long-term business plan, 1, 3, 7, 10-year vision, and making it financially sustainable. Because in the past, mostly people would begin a project and they would have some money and they would just see how it would happen. And that's not something that interests me. So we look at the business plan, we look at the financial plan, and we also look at the competitive environment in which the philanthropist is interested in working. And we usually compare that to be able to see how they can do something usually that's different or distinguishing from that. The other trend that I'm seeing, this goes back, and I also have this podcast, Giving Back is Dead. You know, see, and I'm mostly talking to millennials and seeing the trends they are tracking in terms of giving. And I'm mostly seeing exactly what you're seeing as well. And the future, I'm skeptical about the future for legacy institutions, because I am seeing in general the younger wealthy who are going to be inheriting a lot of money, they're really not interested in supporting legacy institutions. You know, they feel the legacy institutions basically have been structured as a social club, an elite social club, and access to that social club is based on money, and they really they don't like that. So they want to find new ways of thinking about this. And I also, what they do, and the only thing I think about it is the people who will have inherited wealth, they will probably be inheriting a trust. And this trust, in terms of its conditions, could have a certain amount of the funds that have to continue to be provided to some of these legacy institutions. But I'm finding mostly, they want, as you say, they want to make the world a better place. I summarize it. They want to make the world a better place, and they want to, you know, I see like someone like Abby Pucker, who is a Pritzker third or fourth generation. She will be a third or fourth generation billionaire. You know, she feels that if she gets involved with a legacy institution, it is to address underrepresented communities. Mm-hmm. You know, that is really what they want to do. Voila. So, and then another thing the young want is they want the nonprofit initiative to have some kind of revenue generating element to it. So this old way of nonprofit being only dependent on the super wealthy every year giving money, they want to break that dependency. And the way of breaking the dependency is to create within the project that we're doing some element of generating revenue. And I suppose I can talk a little bit more about that, but basically all of these cultural projects, the successful ones, generate intellectual property. And if you're looking at the intellectual property has a potential to have some revenue generating activity. So I structure these organizations and occasionally I run them initially. Voila.
So we are in Saudi Arabia, of course, so I would like to turn the lens on to this country, which has been investing enormously in cultural infrastructure. We heard earlier in the day the government is very active in creating policies and initiatives to support this. But how can then philanthropy perhaps complement the kind of public investment that we're seeing in culture, let's say just in Saudi Arabia and then perhaps more broadly? How do they work hand in hand? And that's a question to open to any of you.
You know, we were talking about this previously, that I think that the fundamental issue for the wealthy Middle Eastern country is they have been positioning themselves as a client of Western cultural institutions, and basically the West has come to see the Middle East as this place to come and get money. And if they see the Middle East as having unlimited funds, and this is the place where basically the bankrupt Western European countries can come to save their institutions. And that's what has been promoted here. So I think we have to shift that in these countries to have it be a place where philanthropists can come and participate. And there are reasons. I mean, I think we were talking about it. Alula is extraordinary. You know, I think one of the successes of the Morgan Library is it's an exceptional and a unique institution in the world. So I think we can attract, in places like the Middle East, you can attract philanthropy because there are unique aspects to being here that will attract it. So something like Wadi Al-Fan, you know, where these are these huge projects that are commissioned now from some of the world's greatest artists. For the moment, I believe we see it as the government is paying for all of these commissions, where all of these artists have significant collectors who support these artists for a long time. You know, James Turrell's project in Wadi Al-Fan is extraordinary. Now, why shouldn't we? I'm convinced that they could have contribution from world's philanthropists.
Can I add something to this?
Absolutely.
Because I think that you raised a very interesting point, and I've been thinking about this in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, the government is wealthy by most international standards. And I think, quite rightly, we heard a number of examples of it today, is as well, alongside attracting investment, internally and from externally, is investing, because it recognizes that investment is needed, that government support is needed. If it is all government, though, I think in the long term it won't thrive. That's partly because the government support may decline one day, oil price dips, but secondly, more importantly, I think you need support from the community, particularly those who are wealthy in that community. That will give a much more robust support to cultural institutions. It will connect them to the community. It will perhaps draw on the cultural heritage and not just import anybody from a foreign opera company that wants to make a quick buck by putting on something in Saudi Arabia. I think there's a need to put down stronger roots, and that will involve, I think, reaching out to people who can to work with the government, other agencies, civil institutions in building that cultural infrastructure.
Yeah,
I think what's lost a little bit in this discussion is the need for great collections and for great art to be visited by emerging cultures and countries.
Yes.
And frankly, much of that is not here, and it can never be here. Some can be acquired, as we know. A great Renaissance masterpiece has been acquired by this kingdom. On the other hand, opportunities to share collections, to share expertise, and to share, and as part of that sharing, to train future generations. This seems to me an opportunity both for institutions and governments and for philanthropy to step in as well. But let's not forget that we're thinking of these wonderful new places and wonderful ways of interpreting art, but we have to have the art and the literature and the objects and the archaeological objects well studied, well shown, and well presented. That's mine.
But there's a beautiful example here that we don't have enough in Europe, the Jamil Foundation, which is speaking about heritage, but also contemporary, and they are doing an amazing job.
Yes.
Have a lot of curators coming from New York, from Berlin, from London, getting there, you know. One of our artists was one of the last guests, Mohamed Al-Faraj. I'm doing a lot of promotion. I love him. He's an iconic young artist. And this artist could have been a superhero in America, in Asia, whatever, you know, and he's been supported a lot by this Jamil, which is private. And they're doing a fantastic scientific job for the community, bringing all the youth to visit exhibition, and it's a non-profit. They are doing an incredible job.
Yeah, Jamil is really the shining example of what can be done here. I think it is the only non-profit, private non-profit cultural.
Yeah, amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you all had a magic wand and you could change something in the global philanthropic ecosystem as it is now, that would really help to unlock more resilient, long-term support for culture, if you could change something that you see as the main barrier or a particularly difficult barrier, what would that be? Also open to any of you.
Greater
or maybe we'll hear from
greater worldwide equality. and I think that because what we really are talking about when you talk about private support is you're talking about having a diverse set of people with a diverse number of interests, and the institutions have to respond to that. So I think if you had a little more income equality, you would see greater diversity and better outreach to community, because we are talking about community.
Of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Monica, did you want to add something?
Well, I think, sometimes there's a misconception that needs to be dispelled about the arts in general. I think many people still perceive the arts as, oh, this is some fun diversion that's distracting us from doing serious things. And we forget that actually it is the arts that is training people's brains so that they can actually do the serious work of being innovative and solving problems. So I think that's one thing that needs to be dispelled. And I also think, and I work at a bank, so obviously I am very accustomed to people who are seeing the world in very short-term, 5, 7, 9-year returns. And when you are investing in arts and culture, it is a long-term play. I mean, when you're going into an elementary school and you are helping these children develop their brains through art, you're going to need to wait 25, 30, 40 years to see what the long-term rewards of that are. So I think also having a more long-term vision is something we're lacking. Yeah.
If I can take both of those comments together, my magic wand, which should not be quite as ambitious as Scott's, more transportation for schools to come to institutions, more free transportations, more money invested in teachers and guides to help those kids just enjoy coming. And I'll give you one very quick example. The flagship educational program at the Morgan Library consists of a full year's funded teaching for Title I schools, that is the poorest schools, and they are introduced to the institution to study medieval illuminated manuscripts. Not perhaps the obvious thing. Why manuscripts? Because the kids are both writing stories and illustrating them, and over 1 year, these schools in Brooklyn and Staten Island and Queens come together and produce these glorious books which we show for 6 weeks. None of those kids, when they come for the ceremony, are nervous about coming to the Morgan Library. None of them are at all intimidated because they've been coming but their parents are intimidated and their grandparents might be slightly intimidated. And how we break that down, the younger generation is fully on board. So I would like that, to see that a little bit more developed.
One thing I think is really important, and it's quite interesting here because clearly leadership of the government here has recognized the importance of culture.
Yes.
As a community, and the link with curative services, on the more and more has been discovered on the impact on children's development and so many things. It's important. That leadership, I fear, is fading in many countries. Culture has always been in danger of being rather seen as elitist. But at the same time, as we recognize all these benefits, the backing for culture by leadership, certainly in my country, is so much less than it was. It's increasingly marginalized, and that isn't only an effect on funding, it's an effect on the belief that culture is important.
Why do you think that's happening?
Why?
Why do you think that's happening?
I think two things. One is it's money that's easily cut, and secondly, because there's a fear that it's seen as elitist.
Yeah.
A fear of that it's seen as elitist.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes. And even recently, a Labour minister was criticised, or was last year, for going to Glyndebourne. How dare she go to Glyndebourne, which is, by the way, it is rather elitist opera company of a country where people dress up. But actually, it wasn't elitist. Why shouldn't she go to it? It was fine opera, world class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have just 2 more minutes left, and I really would like, just very quickly, maybe each of you, if you imagine having a young philanthropist in front of you, so you want to tell them why they should see culture as a powerful legacy investment and not just an act of charity. What would you tell that young future philanthropist?
I would say, philanthropy is definitely, at the end, it can be considered as an utopia, but in the long term, 100% as an education, it brings the human being always better and always link it to the society and to promote it and to get it inside and to be another man.
The thing I always say is there's a joy of giving. If you look at the return against investment of investing in luxuries, it's declining. The more you spend on luxuries, the less value you get. The more you get involved in giving, the more value to your life you find. And with culture, it's magnified because it's actually enjoyable.
I would say to this young philanthropist, trust the expertise in the institution you are looking at. Trust us. We will listen to you. We will appreciate what you are hoping to see emphasize, but also we do know what our audience is, and we share a desire to broaden that audience, but let us find the ways to do that.
Well, I would actually take them, because this younger generation really likes experiences, I would take them to the cancer ward of a children's hospital and have them ask these children how a program with the arts has impacted them.
Very powerful. Any final thoughts, Scott?
I like everything everybody said, but I think if we have to tell the philanthropists why they should give, that's a problem. So in some way you must engage them, like I like the idea of taking them to a hospital, so then they will see themselves why they want to give. That's what I find mostly often what legacy institutions have not been doing, and what the next generation doesn't like, is they tell them why they should give to this extraordinary thing. And mostly you have to engage them.
It's a question of education.
And don't forget the joy. So that's,
The joy.
that's
This
my
is all
takeaway
great.
as well. I wish we had more time. I feel we could speak for another 3 hours. Thank you so much to each of you. Some really incredible insights. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's nice.